Carl Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." And nowhere is this more true than in the relationship between the empath and the narcissist. The empath, gifted with sensitivity and compassion, often becomes the very target of the narcissist's shadow. They absorb pain, manipulation, and chaos, believing that love can heal what is broken. But in the process, they carry the darkness of another. So here's the question. Who does the empath become after surviving this storm? What transformation takes place once they escape the grip of the narcissist? Stay with me until the end of this video, because the answer may change how you see yourself, your wounds, and your power forever. To feel deeply is both a gift and a curse. For the empath, emotions are not just felt. They are absorbed, carried, and often confused as their own. This heightened sensitivity allows them to connect with others on a soul-deep level, but it also makes them the perfect target for the narcissist. The narcissist, unable to confront their own shadow, projects it outward. Carl Jung taught that what remains repressed in the unconscious does not simply disappear. It seeks expression, often by being projected onto others. And so, the narcissist's anger, insecurity, and unhealed wounds are silently handed to the empath. Without realizing it, the empath becomes the vessel of another's darkness. At first, the absorption feels like compassion. The empath tells themselves, "I can help, I can heal, I can carry this for them." But over time, the weight grows unbearable. They wake up drained, anxious, and lost. They begin to question, are these feelings even mine? Or have I been living inside someone else's pain? This is the cruel paradox of the empath's gift. What gives them the ability to love so profoundly also exposes them to manipulation. The narcissist thrives on this, feeding off the empath's energy, attention, and willingness to sacrifice. Every silent absorption becomes another thread in the web of control. And here is the brutal truth. The empath's confusion is not accidental. It is the very trap that keeps them chained. The narcissist benefits from the empath's inability to separate self from other. The longer the empath carries this shadow as if it were their own, the more they lose sight of their true self. Imagine carrying a backpack full of rocks, but none of them belong to you. Day by day, it gets heavier. You stumble under the weight, yet you believe it's your burden to bear. This is the life of the empath entangled with the narcissist. Every unspoken resentment, every unresolved trauma, every shard of projected darkness piles onto their spirit. And the empath asks themselves again, why am I so heavy? Why do I feel broken when I only wanted to help? But here lies the hidden key. This suffering is not meaningless. The burden of absorption is the very stage where awakening begins. For only by carrying what is not theirs does the empath eventually learn to ask the most important question: what belongs to me and what does not? This question cracks the illusion. It is the first spark of individuation, the journey Jung described as becoming whole. The empath begins to see that the darkness they carry is not a reflection of their own worth, but the echo of someone else's shadow. And once this realization takes root, the burden shifts. What once felt like a curse begins to transform into insight. The empath, though wounded, starts to awaken. Survival demands collapse before rebirth. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires nothing less than a direct confrontation with the shadow. And for the empath, The entanglement with the narcissist becomes that confrontation in its most brutal and transformative form. The shattering begins slowly, almost invisibly. At first, the empath believes they are in love, or perhaps that they have found someone who truly needs them. Their compassion, their generosity, their desire to heal all become the very hooks that tie them to the narcissist's hunger. But as time passes, the mask slips. The admiration turns into criticism. The warmth turns into cold indifference. Gaslighting creeps in, twisting the empath's perception of reality. What was once a sanctuary of intimacy becomes a psychological prison where truth itself is distorted. The empath begins to doubt their own memory, their own intuition, their own very sense of self. This is the shattering, a slow erosion of identity until the empath feels hollow, emptied, and lost in darkness. Yet in Jungian psychology, collapse is never meaningless. The breakdown is always the precursor to breakthrough. The empath's despair, as unbearable as it seems, becomes the gateway into the unconscious. The narcissist, in this sense, serves as a dark teacher. By projecting their unresolved shadow onto the empath, they force the empath to confront the hidden shadow within themselves, their unhealed wounds, their unconscious longing for love, their belief that self-worth must be earned through endless sacrifice. It is not a gentle lesson, but it is a necessary one. Without it, the empath would remain asleep, unaware of the depth of their own psyche. The relationship with the narcissist becomes an initiation into the underworld of the self. Every betrayal is a mirror, every lie a reflection, every cruelty a summons to face the parts of the soul that had long been ignored. Jung once wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is precisely what happens here. The empath, forced to endure the narcissist's manipulations, eventually begin to ask the most dangerous and liberating question of all. Is this darkness truly mine, or is it theirs? That question cracks open the illusion. It begins the process of awakening. Awakening, however, does not arrive as a sudden revelation. It is not a flash of light that erases the pain. It is gradual, like dawn breaking after a long and sleepless night. At first, the empath only senses faint whispers of clarity. The realization that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. The recognition that unconditional love does not mean tolerating abuse. The quiet but growing certainty that their sensitivity is not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that must be guarded with discernment. These insights arrive slowly, often drowned out by doubt, but they are seeds of transformation. The empath learns to set boundaries, something they never thought possible. They discover that saying no is not cruelty, but self-respect. They realize that not every wound is theirs to heal, not every broken soul is theirs to mend. They understand that the narcissist's emptiness is not a reflection of their inadequacy, but of the narcissist's refusal to face their own shadow. This clarity begins to dissolve the chains of codependency that once bound them, and with each step, the empath reclaims pieces of themselves that had been scattered and lost. The paradox of this awakening is profound. The empath does not remain broken. Though scarred, though carrying the memory of betrayal, they emerge stronger, wiser, and more sovereign than ever before. What once felt like unbearable suffering becomes the very furnace of transformation. Their pain becomes their teacher, their scars become their scripture, and their shattered identity becomes the raw material for rebirth. No longer the naive healer, The empath becomes a warrior of the psyche, resilient, discerning, and luminous. They still feel deeply, but now they know where their responsibility ends and another's begins. They still love, but not at the cost of self-betrayal. They still walk with compassion, but now it is anchored in strength, not in the desperation to save others. This is the awakening, a death of illusion and a birth of authenticity. From wounded healer, they rise into resilient guardian, tempered by fire, yet illuminated by awareness. So who does the empath become after surviving the narcissist's labyrinth of shadows? The answer is both simple and extraordinary. They become someone entirely unrecognizable to the narcissist. The empath who once bent under the weight of manipulation, who once doubted their own worth, now stands in a place of clarity that the narcissist can neither control nor comprehend. They carry scars, yes, but those scars are not marks of weakness. They are sacred inscriptions, reminders that they endured the fire and emerged not diminished, but transformed. Carl Jung once wrote that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. For the empath, the relationship with the narcissist is that descent into hell, a journey into betrayal, gaslighting, and psychological warfare. And yet, it is precisely this descent that allows the empath to rise higher than ever before. Because only those who have faced the abyss, only those who have looked directly into the darkness, can return with the wisdom to guide others out of it. The transformation begins quietly. The empath, who once absorbed every wave of the narcissist's emotions, now learns to anchor themselves. They discover that their sensitivity is not a curse, but a compass, a refined instrument for navigating the unseen. No longer do they unconsciously absorb darkness. Instead, they witness it with clarity, naming it for what it is. The projection of another is no longer mistaken for their own truth. The empath develops discernment, the ability to say, "This is mine and this is not." That simple distinction becomes a fortress around their soul. And something even more profound occurs. The empath does not simply reject the darkness they once carried. They transmute it. Pain becomes purpose. Wounds become wisdom. Scars become strength. They realize that their suffering was not meaningless. It was alchemical. Just as lead can be turned into gold in the language of alchemy, so too can trauma be turned into power in the language of the psyche. This is the transformation of the empath. Not escape from suffering, but mastery over it. Once naive, they are now awake. Once endlessly forgiving, they now practice boundaries as acts of love. Once consumed by the illusion that saving others was their mission, they now understand that true healing begins with saving oneself. They recognize that compassion without self-respect is not compassion at all, but self-betrayal. And so their love matures, no longer an endless pouring out, but a balanced exchange that honors both self and other. To the narcissist, this transformation is incomprehensible. The empath they once exploited now radiates a strength that no manipulation can penetrate. What once drew the narcissist in, the empath's willingness to give endlessly, has been replaced by a presence that demands respect. And so the narcissist, unable to feed on them any longer, often flees, seeking another source of supply. What remains is the empath, stronger, wiser, unshaken. But the story does not end with survival. The true gift of this transformation is that the empath becomes a healer not out of naivety, but out of strength. They no longer seek to rescue those who refuse to change. Instead, they embody the lesson that healing is a choice, one that each soul must make for itself. Their presence becomes medicine, not because they absorb the sickness of others, but because they stand as living proof that it is possible to walk through the fire and come out whole. Jung taught that individuation requires embracing both the light and the shadow. The transformed empath becomes the embodiment of this teaching. They are not purely light nor purely darkness, but a union of both. They carry the tenderness of compassion and the sharpness of discernment, the openness of love and the strength of boundaries. They are no longer at war with themselves. They are integrated, whole. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. The very relationship that once threatened to destroy them becomes the crucible of their awakening. Without the descent into hell, there would be no ascent into heaven. Without the betrayal, there would be no clarity. Without the shattering, there would be no rebirth. The empath, once broken, now rises as a sovereign soul, untouchable, luminous, and deeply grounded in truth. So who does the empath become? They become a guardian of their own energy, a steward of their own soul. They become someone who can sit in the presence of another's shadow without losing themselves to it. They become someone who transforms pain into purpose, darkness into light, weakness into wisdom. They become proof that survival is not the end of the story. Transformation is. And this transformation is nothing less than a sacred victory of the human spirit. Here is the final revelation. Surviving the narcissist does not destroy the empath. It initiates them. They become a bridge between suffering and healing, between shadow and light. They embody what Jung called the process of individuation, the integration of darkness that makes us whole. So I want to ask you, if you've walked through the fire of narcissistic abuse, who have you become? What has your shadow taught you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. And if this truth resonated with you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this message. This is The Last Thinker. And before you go, the next video is already waiting on your screen. Watch it now, because what you'll discover there will shake you even deeper.